Hello, how's it going, folks? My name is Luke Maffei, and I just wanted to put together a quick slideshow going over 10 tips for a freshman biology major. I made this slideshow simply because I wish I was shown this slideshow 2 years ago when I was getting into biology at St. Francis University. I love the field, and I hope you do too, but if I could go back in time 2 years and tell myself 10 things, these would top my list. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, the first thing I recommend, not only for a bio freshman, but any freshman in general, is to try to find an upperclassman. This tends to be a lot easier if you're going to a college that's in your region, because perhaps you know a friend from high school, or even a sibling. But if you're not from that area, there are still ways to do so. There are groups on Facebook. Sometimes if you're recruited for a sport, you'll meet people that way. Sometimes during orientation or admissions or what have you, when you go for a tour, the person giving you the tour will be someone at that school. And it doesn't hurt to ask them what their major is, how they like the school, just, very honest questions. And it's really important to try to find someone else that's in your major, and someone in particular that has done well in that field. I can't stress that enough, because whenever you have problems or questions, they're always someone you want to go to. The next thing I highly recommend is looking up your professors before you actually go to class, just to get an idea of who they are. I recommend using Rate My Professors. I think it's a fantastic tool. Just know that when you're sorting through these reviews, take everything with a grain of salt, because some of the reviews in which a teacher may score all ones, that may be a student that is sour that they didn't do so well in the class. So bear that in mind. Usually the ones I tend to direct my attention to are the ones that have longer descriptions, not just ratings. Because honestly, sometimes you'll go on a tour or you'll meet professors ahead of time, and they'll assure you, don't worry, no matter who you have, they'll give you a fair chance. All professors grade the same. I can tell you from firsthand experience that is definitely not true. Though I'm not trying to discredit anyone that's told me that in the past. From my perspective, I just really have noticed differences in teaching styles and grading rubrics, etc. So it's really important to do that sort of research on your own. Or as I mentioned, the upperclassmen, they've been through the classes. I highly recommend contacting them, asking them what their opinions are. All right, the next thing you need to understand, no one took the time to explain this to me when I was a freshman. What you need to realize is when you take a bio course, most bio courses are structured in which a way you'll have a lab and a lecture. Lecture is when you sit on your chair and you listen to the professor go over different slides, or maybe they'll give you a handout, or sometimes there'll be a group discussion, something of that sort. And lab is usually when it's more hands-on. You're dissecting something, you're observing a reaction, you're using a microscope, that sort of thing. You need to understand that these two sections are not weighted the same. Usually lecture is worth more than your lab. Lecture is usually 3 credits and lab is usually 1. And in some schools they require you to pass both lecture and lab if you don't want to get a failing grade, but that varies from system to system. I recommend investigating this on your own time. Another thing I want to recommend is trying to get into your lab after hours. There are these things called practicals, which are essentially lab tests. When you'll walk in, there'll be a specimen or a slide or something of the sort, and your job is to either identify it or answer a question. Many schools tend to do this, and this is their way of, one of their ways of grading in the lab. I shouldn't say it's the only way, but it's one of the most important. In some classes, it's actually the only way that they will grade you. So as much time as you spend in the lab, the more time the better. It's good to get in so that way you can look at the specimens, because the specimens you use in lab will most likely be the ones on the practical. So try to get into your lab after hours. If the professor doesn't mention it, please bring it up. Not every professor will, make it their duty, but it's up to you to get into lab on your own time. They can't force you to do it. The next thing is more about the paradigm, kind of the structure of the courses you need to take. Course order, I recommend going with what the school gives you, but that doesn't work for everyone. I understood during my sophomore semester, everyone needed to take organic chemistry 1 and 2. That was a bio major, and that was rather difficult because organic chemistry tends to be pretty challenging. So what some people do is they'll move that class to their junior year, or they'll try to take it over the summer. Essentially, make sure that your course order and your paradigm in place is something that works well for you. It's good not to burden yourself, because that way you can focus on what really matters, and that is your science GPA, essentially. The next thing I recommend is finding a focus. And if you haven't found one yet, that's fine. If you know what you want to do after college, that's even better. You need to understand when you're studying biology, it doesn't mean that, when you graduate, you're going to find yourself, right in the lab. You could go on to medical school. You could go into vet school. You may want to do something in marine biology, botany. The list goes on and on. So it's good to kind of explore these alternatives to what you may have in mind, because who knows, you may want to shift focus. All right, this next one is getting lecture material. Many times professors will put their lecture slides up online, or sometimes it's not always slides, sometimes it'll just be a Word document or something of the sort. Sometimes it's a Prezi. You want to get that same thing that they show you in class, because the majority of professors are probably going to show you some sort of slideshow or what have you. You want to get that same slideshow they have, and if they will not give it to you, find a way to get it. Take pictures, record the lecture. I've seen students recreate slides in Microsoft PowerPoint, just a very bare bones version. I recommend just asking your professor. I'm sure they'd be more than happy to give it to you, provided that, the information on there is something that's readily available to all students. Okay, the next thing you got to do is acknowledge your mistakes. I've seen time and time again students that just will not want to admit that they're wrong. Myself included, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. You really need to acknowledge where you're wrong and strive to improve it, because if you do not admit that you're wrong, then that can confuse you as well as other students, and it can place a strain on the teacher. Essentially, you're disagreeing with what is fact. Okay, the next thing I recommend is doing your own math. GPA calculators are great and all, I'm not criticizing those, but when it comes to finding your grade for an actual class, I'm not talking finding your weighted GPA, the system will usually do that math for you, but it's best that you do it on your own as well, because sometimes you'll notice that the professor forgot to put in a grade for a quiz, or sometimes when you're going through it, adding the numbers, you'll notice that a professor only gave you 8 points instead of 80 points. True story, that almost destroyed my 1 grade. So it's important to go through the numbers yourself. Usually there's something up on some institutions use Blackboard. Whatever the equivalent to that is, it's best that you just take the time, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes, just to go through the numbers, make sure everything's fine, add everything up, and just make sure that you're getting the points that you're entitled to. All right, this is a huge tip. I wouldn't say, I would say this is my biggest tip. I'm not afraid to say it. This is my biggest tip for a freshman that wants to become a biology major. Stay away from Chegg. It's all right to get your books there, but for the love of God, do not use Chegg to cheat or just take answers that you don't know. I've seen so many times students have used this service, and in a way they're being dishonest because they're taking other students' work and they're passing it off as their own. And if you think you're smart by using this service, what you need to understand is not all the answers on this service are correct, or sometimes it's almost unfair because you'll pay for the subscription. I've seen this happen. I've never used Chegg myself. You'll pay for the subscription and Chegg will say, we have the answers to your textbook solutions, and it won't be there. They'll straight up lie to you. And not only that, sometimes if there is a solution, there's no guarantee that it's correct because they are often user-submitted answers. If you have a question about a homework problem or something that you're not familiar with in class, please go see your professor. Do not use this service or anything like it. It may seem like, an easy way out, and If it works for you, good for you. Congratulations. I'm sure you've learned a lot by reading someone else's work. Just the take-home point, there's no easy way out. You need to learn. I've seen students drop a bio major because of this. I'm not even exaggerating. So yeah, I think that is my biggest tip. Because you probably could have assumed or learned anything else I just said. So that's essentially it. If you have any other questions, you can ask me. I'm always open for any sort of discussion you want to have. You can just leave a comment or email me. But more importantly, I recommend talking to an advisor, a professor, even someone in your high school, or someone you know that has gone to the same college you're going to that's in the same program. It's important to reach out and never be afraid to ask. Thank you and have a nice day.